What are your thoughts here on setting up a corporation?
It's in Canada and Ontario. The corporation is essentially our closest equivalent to the LLC. Basically, if you incorporate a company, you're creating a legal entity which is recognized by both law and taxation as its own legal person or entity. So it has to file its own forms and it collects its own taxes and so forth, just like you do as a person. I think the question really isn't how much are you going to make as a business, but how much are you going to retain in the business, in the corporation, in the corporate vehicle. That's, I think, a crucial question that, depending on the answer, will more strengthen your reason to incorporate versus not.
What's going on, YouTube? It's Lynn Matheson here, and welcome to another episode here on the Canadian Real Estate Channel. I am here joined by Ryan Carson, and we're actually going to be breaking down a hot topic of how to set up a corporation for your investment properties for a first-time investor. We're going to break that down step by step with Ryan Carson here, who is a real estate investor lawyer in Burlington, Ontario, and he actually runs the Carson Law firm. So he's going to break this all down. He's been featured on this channel several times, and he's a wealth of knowledge. So welcome to the channel, Ryan.
Hey, well, thanks very much. I'm really happy to be here.
Awesome. Well, let's break it down a little bit. So this is definitely something that a lot of people ask. When should I set up a corporation? Should I put it in my personal name? What are the benefits, pros and cons? And I think there's also this idea that you have to set up a corporation when you're first buying an investment property. So I'd love just to dive a little bit deeper into that topic and just understand the full scope of the pros and cons to setting up a corporation and what that process even looks like as a first-time investor. So let's just get right into that topic. So Ryan, again, thanks for coming on and breaking this down today. What are your thoughts here on setting up a corporation?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely, especially for real estate investors, especially if it's something they're looking at kind of growing short, medium, and long term, I think it's definitely something that's worth exploring. I mean, you'd want to explore it with like your power team, holistically. There's usually two main reasons why you would want to potentially incorporate and create a company to, be acquiring your real estate investments through instead of buying them in your personal name. One is going to be to create basically asset and creditor protections, from personal liability and business liabilities. So that's going to exist the second you ever, whenever you incorporate and create a company. But the other benefit, and this is probably the one that usually kind of drives the bus in the decision making, is you're trying to save tax. You're trying to create a tax structure corporately that is going to be advantageous and have you pay less money to the government in tax payments, but also allow you to shelter and potentially generate more investments under like a corporate structure and vehicle as opposed to in your personal name. So as my brief example, I think there illustrates, it's really important to go through like your whole, power team of like the lawyer, to seek their opinions and comments on it, your accountant, obviously. It's also really important to talk to your mortgage broker, your home insurance or your property insurance advisor, and your real estate coach, because the real estate coach has probably already had to face this decision. And so they can probably give you some good life lessons, hopefully quick hitters to not make the same mistakes that maybe they have. or they've learned from. Your mortgage broker is going to be important because banks will typically only lend mortgage funds through a corporation so many times before you have to open another corp, for example, or find some other way of securing, the loans. And then your property home insurance is important because especially with greater issues of like extreme weather. And we've sort of seen this with like flooding over the last couple of years, like out west and even in Ontario. And most recently, the news showed some pretty bad flooding in the state of New York. So there's a lot more flooding happening and potential sewer backups and things like that. So I think you want to make sure you've got a really good property insurance rep who will not only get you the right coverage for the property, but also make sure that they consider the ownership of the property and still make sure you can get a really robust insurance coverage so that you're covered whenever there's, damage, fire, flood, etc. to a property. So I would definitely encourage you to, have this conversation, not just with your lawyer and not just with your accountant, but your whole power team. Obviously, certain members of the power team may be more crucial to you making the decision of whether or not you should incorporate and set up a company for your, real estate investment portfolio. But I think it's something that holistically you do need to discuss with everybody, just so that everybody's on the same page and you can make sure you've got the right tax advice, the right legal advice, and then the financing and the home protection is going to be there.
Absolutely. Yeah, I definitely appreciate that. It's really important that you not only talk to your real estate lawyer just to actually get it set up, but you talk to your whole power team to understand the full scope of the why behind getting it set up, and just make sure that you're making the right decision based off of what your goals are. So let's say I'm first time real estate investor and I want to set up a corp. What is the process? So let's go step by step of what I would need to do in order to get that set up and what I should expect along the way.
Yeah, well, maybe let's take a step back and just talk about like what are the most common forms of business ownership in Canada, because a lot of real estate investors that are watching your channel are probably watching and reading and getting information from sources that could be south of the border. And so we don't, even though we're similar systems of law, Canada to US, we're not identical. And I know that people ask me the question, I'd like to set up an LLC, a limited liability corporation, which is a very common corporate structure for real estate investors in the US. Unfortunately, Canada doesn't have an LLC. So Canada basically has four main forms of business ownership that you can do. They have a sole proprietorship, which is just, Rebecca Lynn Matheson buying the property in her personal name and just running her real estate investment business through her name, Rebecca Lynn Matheson. Partnership, where Rebecca and Ryan Carson are partners, and they have a partnership agreement, and we registered under the Partnerships Act of Ontario. And as the name suggests, you need at least two or more people to be in a partnership. And sometimes those partnerships can have general partners where we both share the same risk and liability and return on investment, or sometimes partners can be limited to their liability within the partnership, but then they have limited returns as well. So there's a little subcategory there, partnerships. There's one called a cooperative, but it's not really very applicable for real estate investors. So we won't really talk about it other than just to mention it. And then the last one that you're really talking about is, corporation. So forming a legal company. And it's in Canada and Ontario, the corporation is essentially our closest equivalent to the LLC. So basically, if you incorporate a company, you're creating a legal entity, which is recognized by both law and taxation as its own legal person or entity. So it has to file its own forms and it collects its own taxes and so forth, just like you do as a person. But corporations, as I alluded to before, provides you with different options that sole proprietorship and partnerships just don't have. And typically, most people will say once you're generating a certain amount of revenue, you'd want to be incorporated, because then you can hopefully save more money in taxes and or corporate investment strategies, etc. And I don't disagree with that statement. I think there's definitely a measuring stick, and most people sort of say, if you're doing like 250 to 500K, then you should be incorporated, so to speak. But I think, and I've heard an accountant use this statement before, and I just love it, so I just keep using it. It's really about how much can you keep in the corporation. So if you think about this logically, if all the money that goes into your corporation comes out into your personal hands, well, really, you're not going to be able to take advantage of really any corporate options and benefits, because you're just flowing it in and out of the company. Where corporations become really beneficial from a tax and corporate investment strategy perspective is when you take the money and it goes into the corp, and then you only have a little bit of it or a portion of it coming back out, after your operating expenses, etc. So the idea is, if you can shelter and invest at a corporate level within your corporation, you're going to save not only taxes at your personal income level, but you're going to save taxes inside the corporation level. And then you've probably got some different investment opportunities inside a corporate vehicle that you might not have, in a personal capacity. So I think the question really isn't how much are you going to make as a business, but how much are you going to retain in the business, in the corporation, in the corporate vehicle. That's, I think, a crucial question that, depending on the answer, will more strengthen your reason to incorporate versus not. The other point that I brought up earlier about, once you incorporate, there's this automatic divide in your assets, what are owned by the corporation and what are owned personally, and then also like the liabilities. And so unless there's been gross negligence of an officer or director of a corporation, you can't create personal liability within a corporation. So most real estate investors will try to take their corporate structure, their corporate org chart, and make sure that the corporate entities just own like the real estate. And then they keep they try to keep as much personal and other liabilities away from the assets of the corporations, right? And then so it goes both ways. If you got sued or you ran into a problem with your corporate structure and your corporate business of real estate investing, it won't trickle over and affect your personal home. But if you also got, for some reason, sued personally, that people that are suing you personally can't come after all your assets that are sitting in your corporate entities either. So you get this divide between assets and creditor protection, so to speak. There's so many other things that you could talk about asset, creditor protection and asset protection, on a corporate level, but it probably could take up an entirely, different presentation for that.
Absolutely. Yeah, it sounds like that could be a whole nother video here. So we'll have to add that to the scope of our videos here with you, Ryan. But I like the breakdown that you gave there of the 4 different options for forming companies in Canada. I definitely have heard the term LLC quite a lot. So hearing the differentiation between the States versus Canada, I think is an important thing. And also determining what your goal is with the corp and with your partners. So if you have kind of multiple people set up in your corporation, that conversation to be had about what are you actually keeping in the company and what are your goals within that corporation, how many properties are you looking to take down, how much of an investment are you looking to make year over year. I think that's a very important element to determine whether or not it makes sense for you to actually incorporate or not. So I definitely have a greater understanding here of the kind of pros and cons here of investing through a corporation versus not. Now, let's talk about the actual setup of the corporation. So if I were Rebecca Lynn Matheson going to set up a personal corporation that was actually a separate entity from me investing in my personal name, with Rebecca as the sole owner of that corporation, how would I go about doing that? And what are the actual steps that I would need from a setup standpoint?
Yeah, so if we use our process as an example, we have some onboarding like file opening forms. We need to get ID form completed. There's a corporate ID form. We'd have a retainer so that the clients have transparency of like what will the cost of the incorporation file be. We get a deposit typically sent to us by e-transfer. And then we have a very kind of straightforward file intake form that we get the clients and or their accountants to help them fill in. Just sort of going through like, what's the name of the corp that you might want if you have a specific name, who are the officers, directors, shareholders going to be, is there any instructions about like the price per share, what's the year-end filing date, who's the accountant going to be, what bank are you going to use for the corporation, address of all the different parties involved, the registered address for the business, mailing address if different. So these sorts of things are going to be like the information we have on our intake sheet that we get collected, but they're all on info sheets, so it's pretty even though it might not be simple, we try to make it simple. It's just we try to make it a collection of information, all on kind of simple forms. Now, that being said, depending again, whether it's somebody just starting off from scratch or it's a previously existing investor kind of reorganizing themselves through their accountant, sometimes the accountants will provide quite a bit of insight from a standpoint of providing us a corporate memo or what we call a step memo. So it outlines what they want to see. So in a lot of cases, the accountant is a crucial person to talk to because of that tax component that you're trying to maximize on. And they will typically, again, depending on the client's situation, they will kind of drive the bus a little bit, sending over like the information in like I said, that memo, that setup memo or letter. And then that helps us get a lot of the information that we need for the client's corporate setup. But otherwise, if it was just like, hey, I haven't done anything yet. I don't have a property, but I know my goal is I want to have 10 every year. So, in 5 years, I'm going to have 50 properties. I want to get them all under I want to make sure I get the first one through, the next 50 all under like some corporate structure. So, let's just get it simple and straightforward. Let's just get a company open to start. And then once I start doing a couple properties, I'll start getting the accountant's opinion on things. I mean, we can do a simple, like I said, client intake and information collection form and get you that company set up. But for most real estate investors, I think it's really important to work with an accountant. And this is where working with an accountant that's a real estate investor themselves is really great. I'd be cautious of an accountant telling you don't need to incorporate. because they're looking at the now. Have them look at like where you're going to be in like 5 and 10 years, not like right now, because the issue is, yeah, if you only have 1 or 0 properties or just a small handful of properties at the moment, and they're kind of like, well, you don't really have the asset base or the cash flow to warrant incorporating from a tax point of view. But the big thing is what will it be in 5 to 10 years? Because if you'll have a whole bunch of need at that time, the problem is to go backwards and incorporate all these things, you're going to have to pay land transfer tax again at probably appreciated values. So why not just put it into a corporation from the very beginning, save yourself the double land transfer taxing, and get yourself a head start on that corporate structure. Again, unless the accountant has some overwhelming reason that it's actually going to end up hurting you. Like you're going to pay more money, you're going to pay more tax and that kind of thing. If the only extra cost is the accountant's cost of filing the tax return, then I would say if you're going to be an aggressive builder of your portfolio, it's probably a good cost of doing business. Like get incorporated first and just accept that maybe for the first 1 or 2 years, your accountant's tax bills are going to be more than you might have to pay if you didn't incorporate, but it'll be worth it because down the road in year 3, 4, and 5, you're going to be saving like 3 times the amount of what you've paid out in the first 2 years.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate that from a just forward-thinking perspective of what your actual end goal is. And it sounds like there's a bit of a process here. So I'm sure there's both ways that you can execute on this, like have a corp already set up or do one prior to closing. But what is the actual timeline typically on some of these? Like if I found a property, let's say, should I have already done that? And if I haven't, how quickly can we get a corp set up if I wanted to actually put that in the corp name?
Yeah, I mean, like a lot of things nowadays, a lot of it's kind of online. So we can do it fairly quickly as long as the information from the client and or accountant is sort of readily available in short order. It can be done in like a week or 2, maybe less, maybe in a couple of days. The clients would need, so the part that might take a bit of time is making sure that you get an HST number and stuff, which is a little bit more like for your tax side of things, or if you're buying commercial properties, it's important to make sure you have that HST number, but we don't normally file for those. Those get applied for by the client or the accountant of the client, but those can take a little bit longer than the actual registration of the incorporation. But if we have all the information from the client and the accountant from the date that we have all the information we need in our information sheets and so forth, we can probably have it electronically registered, giving you a certificate of incorporation within a couple of days. Finalizing the minute books and everything thereafter might take up to a week or 2. It just depends, I guess, how busy we are in the volume at the moment. But what the client would need for the real estate transaction and the financing part of it with the bank and to close in a corporate name would be the certificate of incorporation.
Got it. So that can actually be a very quick turnaround time if say you didn't have a deal yet, but you wanted to actually close in that corporation. And from a title perspective, you can essentially just amend that title with the seller just to include your actual corporation name rather than your personal name if you did have a deal prior to closing. Now, with that actual setup, you mentioned just having all of your ducks in a row. So you kind of already outlined what those ducks are in a row that you need to have. You got to have your name, etc. Now, if I have a name, there's ideally a searching process to make sure that there's no other corp in that name already. So that can actually all happen within that 1 to 2 day turnover time, potentially, as long as I have all of the options laid out.
That's right. Yeah, it's a nuanced search, NUANS. So that search we can do, like you can, if we know the name even ahead of having all the other information, we can check, because if it turns out there's something identical or similar, you might, have to rethink your name. Worst case scenario, lots of investors just go with the next assigned corporate number, because you can always do like a business name registration. So you could always do like 123 Ontario Inc. operating as, and then pick your business name, and then it doesn't have to slow up your corporate certificate. Because the one thing I would probably say, even though we could do it fairly quickly, within a couple of days to a week, the banks might not be able to move as quickly, for financial approvals, and the property home insurance again might be in the same boat, might not be able to move as quickly. So I would not encourage any investors listening to kind of leave it, to the week of closing to incorporate. I think once you've got the deal firmed up and you're going to move forward with it, hopefully it's a 30-day window or something. Get it to your lawyer right away, get it to your bank rep right away, and make sure everybody's on the same page that, look, I'm going to incorporate, or here's the new incorporation I made. What do we need to do? That way, everybody has time. Time is the most valuable commodity really for your professionals in closing the deals, because it's the only thing we can't, buy back or make really. So, having as much time as we can with the file to prep it, to process it, to, discuss with you, the client, that's the most important asset for us.
Absolutely. Now, for everyone listening, Ryan and I also broke down all of the closing costs that you could potentially incur when you're closing out a real estate transaction. And this is just another thing that you definitely want to budget for and have that kind of extra layer of budget if you do plan to incorporate, making sure that A, you budget some money to go towards incorporating, but B, you budget time, as Ryan was suggesting there. That's one of the biggest commodities in a real estate transaction, is actually having time for each power team member to actually complete all of these tasks and get the transaction to completion. So I definitely appreciate that. Now, you mentioned a couple of other avenues of purchasing a property and setting up a business. Now, joint venture agreements or going 50-50 with somebody on title, that would be a separate thing to actually setting up a full proper corporation with someone or with yourself. So is there anything additionally that somebody would need to do prior to closing to ensure that they're set up for success there in the property for that type of setup?
Not really. Like, I mean, sometimes parties will want to be a corporate party to a joint venture, or just be personally the party to the joint venture. I mean, you can do either, right? So I know a lot of real estate investors conduct their business through joint venture agreements, and so sometimes they are a party to the joint venture through a corporation, or sometimes they're a party to the joint venture through personal name. So you can do either. And I mean, the process is relatively similar. Whether you need us to incorporate your entity and then work on your JV work, we can do that. Or you come already incorporated, and then we just need to, understand the purpose and the instructions and so forth with the JV, and we work on the JV. But you can have personal or corporate parties to any JV or any combination.
Love that. Yeah, Ryan, thanks so much for breaking that down step by step on how to set up a corporate structure, the Canadian LLC, if you will, since we don't have that here in Canada. The next best thing here is setting up that corporate structure. And one of the points that I really want to emphasize that you covered here, Ryan, is just make sure that you are actually talking to all of your power team members, not just your lawyer, your accountant, your mortgage agent, your insurance broker as well, just so that you have a full scope of what you actually need and want from the corporate structure so that it can be set up accordingly. And then also your timelines. So not only should you budget in terms of monetary budget, but you need to budget your timelines and plan accordingly. So making sure that you're not waiting till the last minute to set this kind of stuff up is really important. Thinking ahead when you know that that deal is going to go firm, actually setting up your schedule so that your lawyer has everything that they need. You've already talked to your power team and you're able just to move forward quickly on the transaction. Awesome. Well, Ryan, thanks for coming on for another episode here on the Canadian Real Estate Channel. Always appreciate hearing from you and chatting with you to break down the real estate law side of things, and definitely look forward to seeing some more episodes here on the channel with you breaking this down. So Ryan, thanks for coming on. And guys, if you want to check out any of Ryan's other videos, just check out Carson Law on the Canadian Real Estate Channel. And also, if you want to connect with Ryan, just check out the links below in the description and we'll have some there if you want to work with the Carson Law team. So Ryan, thanks again for coming onto the channel.
Thanks very much. Thanks for having me. Always a pleasure. Good luck, everybody.